Now, it is we talked about heaven, paradise. What about hell? It is said that لها سبعة أبواب and وقودها الناس والحجارة وإن منكم إلا واردها, and with different names, الحطمة, الهاوية, سقر, and all these things. I mentioned the question, please.
In fact, I also mentioned hell without naming it, because I mentioned the basic principle of transfer of only waves or pulses or watch to the brain, and they tell us what is pleasurable and also what is most punishing and hurting. And sometimes the same thing can be pleasurable for one and punishing for the other. That is why in English they say one man's poison is another man's meat. Right? For one man's meat is another man's poison, either way it could be. So that is why we decide here. There the food will not change, it will be the same. Let's imagine one situation. And that if the source of pleasure is one, and it is poison for us while we have trained ourselves in a way that it is poisonous for us, then it will not provide us any pleasure at all. You know, things which sometimes you taste and throw out, it is so punishing. An animal goes and picks it up and enjoys. So that is one way of thinking. I mean, this is just a projection of possible, projection into the possible things, and I'm going to develop it further. Now, one thing remember, they will be those who are hellbound. They will not be provided anything for which they had developed taste here, because that would be forbidden in the hereafter. All the false things to which they were attached will be removed from them. That is one form of hell. If you desire something, if you get it, this is heaven. If you do not get it, the counter is hell, in fact. If you are deprived of everything you love, everything you want, this is the greatest punishment that can happen to you. But also remember, in this world we know that some follies of ours, some desires unfulfilled, take a form of fire. And that fire which you feel here actually is mentioned as fire. I can quote one example of a man who was at that time. Now there are so many rich people in Pakistan. There are just a few, and he was among the most, the richest person in Pakistan. He met an Ahmadi in a party. I never met him myself, but he met an Ahmadi who also was a businessman of some order, and they were blood relations as well. This man was Ahmadi, he was not an Ahmadi. So in a grand party he had thrown, where more than 1,000 people were invited, you know, all the big people, everybody who was worth anything in Pakistan, he attended his party. And he went to say, congratulations, you have done a great thing and you must be very happy. Suddenly he said, happy? What do you mean happy? He opened his buttons like this. If you could peek in, there is raging fire. I'm the most unhappy man on earth. He was the richest. So these were the very words he described his feeling here. So because these feeling of punishment which man sometimes receives here in this earth is described as fire. You see a cancer patient dying sometimes, he describes what he is suffering. It's a burning fire. Well, there is no fire. So if these feelings are exaggerated out of all proportion in the life to come, then like the pleasure will be exaggerated and it will be could not be compared with the place here. So that hellfire would take a form which will begin to burn the person far more vigorously and with such violence as he had no experience before. And because it will be spiritual, so there will be no burning of anything. Burning in the sense that one becomes accustomed. Spiritual fires, as long as they rage, they continue to hurt and they do not create any defense against themselves. If you remember any moment in your life where you made a mistake and you began to suffer, until God made you, forget things because of the healing time and this and that, that memory sometimes continues to burn. And if it's a really big loss, you will see women who have lost their children, loved ones, they continues to pine away and they can never forget.
For years and years.
Yes. So this is the meaning of juludun. If something happens temporarily, people come and apparently, a scar is created, but then the same thing is happening. Now, the same thing happens again and again and again. I quote you a real example from the history of Britain. It is said, in those days, people of Scotland who tried to, throw the yoke of the British and get liberated from their control or their rule, many a time staged protests and came to the streets, but they were very heavily punished. And sometimes they were turned out of the country, packed in some ships and sent to Australia. Now, Australia, as we know today, is a big country, is a continent. It is mostly made of the criminals who were sent from England to occupy an island that far, never to return here. You see, that was the philosophy of it. In how little the people of that time know that they are offering them a great continent and they will give birth to generations which will be proud of being the masters of this continent. But at that time, it was just a punishment. A woman, it is reported in history, had one son who was young and who was arrested in one of the riots and sent out to Australia, packed in a ship. Now this woman became mad, day in and day out. That was the only thing she did. She got ready, prepared herself, that my son is about to return now. Until she died, this was the unchangeable routine. So the spiritual suffering is not a small thing. And if this suffering is exaggerated and the birds are made far more sensitive, that is hell, raging fire. So raging fire for a spirit has to be a spiritual raging fire. Right?
Yes, sir.